Have you ever wondered what you'd do if, in the midst of absolute wartime chaos, your eyes saw something that simply shouldn't be there? Imagine a minefield, eerie in its silence, where every step could mean the end, and right in the middle of that deadly scene, the fragile figure of a child, standing completely still, as if the surrounding danger didn't exist. What would you do? Would you run? Call for help? Or would you charge forward, even knowing you might never come back? Stick with me till the end, because what you're about to discover might profoundly surprise you. War has a sound of its own. It's not just the noise of explosions or distant gunfire, it's a heavy silence that foreshadows the worst. It was in that silence that a soldier, experienced, trained to suppress emotions, felt something unfamiliar pierce his chest. His eyes scanned the terrain ahead, spotting nearly invisible marks on the ground, unmistakable signs of a minefield. Every meter forward meant certain death. And then, among warning signs and wreckage, he saw her, a child. Small. Alone. Standing exactly where no one should be alive. For a moment, time seemed to slow. The soldier's heart accelerated in a way no military training had ever prepared him for. That image made no sense. Children didn't belong there, not in a war zone, not in a minefield. His mind tried to rationalize it: extreme fatigue, combat stress, hallucination. But his eyes kept seeing. And the longer he looked, the more real it felt. Have you ever felt that strange sensation, that something's wrong, yet impossible to ignore? The soldier knew stories. Tales of comrades who returned from war changed, not just by visible wounds, but by experiences they could never explain. Whispered accounts of spiritual signs on the battlefield, of voices, visions, premonitions that saved lives. Until that moment, he'd always listened with skepticism. To him, war was concrete, brutal, no room for the inexplicable. But there, facing that child, every certainty began to crumble. The silence was so deep he could hear his own breath inside his helmet. One wrong step, and it would all be over. And yet, something within him shouted louder than fear, an almost instinctive human impulse he couldn't contain. He didn't see an enemy. He saw a life in danger. And perhaps that's precisely what war tries hardest to destroy: the capacity for compassion. Yet there it was, pulsing strongly, forcing him to make a decision no manual had ever taught. As seconds ticked by, the child didn't move. Didn't cry. Didn't call for help. She just looked. A gaze the soldier would never forget, calm yet urgent, compelling him to take his first step beyond the safe line. Every movement was calculated, every breath held. Adrenaline surged. He knew this act might be the last of his life. But he also knew he couldn't live with himself if he simply turned away. What happens next changes everything, not just in that minefield, but in the soldier's entire life after the war ended. Soldiers who return from war often carry invisible scars, memories that surface in the stillness of night. Some call it trauma. Others call it destiny. And there are those who believe that in certain extreme moments, the spiritual manifests in ways that defy all human logic. Take a deep breath and stay with me, because this vision that paralyzed the soldier is only the beginning of a story that weaves through war, faith, and what many still fear to name. What comes next reveals the exact moment when everything stopped making sense, and nothing was ever the same again. He moved forward, body tense, feeling the weight of his rifle and the memories he'd carried even before that day. Every step echoed inside his own mind, as if the minefield existed within him too. And as this story begins to unfold, perhaps something inside you is awakening as well. Because, in some way, we've all faced situations that challenged our logic, our faith, or what we believed possible. If this resonates with you, leave a comment below about what touched you most so far. Sometimes, writing is the first way to understand what we feel. Stories like this aren't meant just to be heard in silence. They create invisible bridges between people who've never met but share the same doubts, fears, and unanswered questions. Maybe you've never set foot on a battlefield, but you've felt that spine-chilling moment when something inexplicable happened. Or maybe you know someone who came back from war changed, carrying signs that don't show up in photographs. Sharing your experience or thoughts in the comments might help someone else feel less alone. Your voice matters more than you imagine. And if, at any point in this account, your heart raced, your mind painted vivid images, or you felt that silent tension alongside the soldier, liking this video is a simple but powerful way to show that these kinds of stories need to keep being told. Every like helps this content reach more people seeking to understand war's invisible side, spiritual marks, deep transformations unseen in news reports. This channel exists precisely for this, to make space for moving stories, transformed lives, and accounts that touch places ordinary words can't reach. When you subscribe, you're not just following a channel. You're saying you want to keep walking through these narratives, to be part of a community that listens, feels, and reflects. Your participation is what allows this channel to grow and reach more people with this kind of content, keeping alive a message that goes beyond entertainment. So, as the soldier takes another step across that silent terrain, while the image of the child remains etched in his memory, and perhaps now in yours, stay with me. Because what comes next deepens this moment even further, revealing details few dare to tell, and changes everything from here on out. The setting where it all happened wasn't just hostile, it was designed to destroy every remnant of humanity. A dry, scarred land marked by old craters, charred vehicle husks, and rusted warning signs that no longer frightened anyone. There, the conflict had no clear face. No defined front lines or rear guard. Every mission was a leap into the dark, every step a decision that could cost everything. Soldiers operating in such environments quickly learn that the real enemy isn't always armed. Sometimes, it lies buried beneath the earth, silent, waiting for the perfect moment. That day's mission was simple on paper but brutal in execution. Area reconnaissance, checking for possible enemy routes, slow and steady advancement. The kind of operation demanding absolute focus and near superhuman emotional control. Constant risk came not just from explosions, but from psychological erosion. Hours of silent marching under a merciless sun, exhausted body, mind on high alert. At any second, it could all end. And when you live like that for days, weeks, months, something inside you begins to change. In that environment, the soldier's mindset transformed. Emotions were suppressed, decisions had to be fast, survival instinct overrode deeper reflection. There was no room for distraction or lingering thoughts. And yet, no matter how hard they tried to shield themselves, no one emerged unscathed. Every face seen, every village crossed, every unexpected sound accumulated like invisible layers in the mind. It's in wars backstage that these marks begin forming, long before any extraordinary event occurs. Have you ever wondered what you do in that field in the midst of absolute wartime and constant tension? Your eyes saw something that simply shouldn't be there as an escape from reality. Imagine a minefield, others shut down completely, where every step could mean only when necessary. And right in the middle of that deadly scene, who carried the fragile figure of a child, a token in their pocket still, a phrase repeated silently, danger didn't exist. A fixed thought of distant family. What would you do? All of it formed part of an inner journey no one spoke of openly. Or would you charge forward, everyone shared in some way? You might never come back. War doesn't just destroy cities till the end. It reshapes because what you're about to discover might profoundly surprise you. Grasping the impact of what was about to happen. It's not just the noise of explosions or distant gunfire. He made hard choices. It's a heavy silence that foreshadows the worst. Forget. It was in that silence that a soldier, read terrain signs, trained to suppress emotions. The minefield wasn't just an invisible threat. It was almost a living entity, the terrain present in every briefing and invisible marks to exhaustion. Unmistakable signs of a minefield. A single mistake every meter forward for regret. Certain death. The silence of that place among warning signs and wreckage. It was heavy. He saw her, artificial, a child, the absence of life, alone. No birds, standing exactly where no one should be alive. Dragging dust for a moment. Distant sound that might have been artillery. The soldier's imagination accelerated in a way no military training has ever prepared him for. The brain, strained by fear and fatigue, children didn't belong there. Patterns, not in a war zone, not in a minefield. Some would call his mind tried to rationalize it. Others
extreme
say
fatigue,
it's exactly in
combat
such
stress,
moments that
hallucinations
hallucinations find space
his
to emerge.
eyes kept seeing.
Now I want to go
And the
even
longer he
deeper,
looked,
because
the more
context
real it
isn't
felt.
just background.
Have you ever
It's
felt
essential
that
to the
strange
transformation
sensation
unfolding?
that something's wrong?
When someone
yet
spends too
impossible
long
to
where
ignore,
death is a
the
constant
soldier
possibility,
knew
their
stories.
worldview shifts.
Tales of comrades who
Decisions
returned from
stop
war
being
changed,
merely strategic
not just by
and
visible
become
wounds,
existential,
but by experiences
every choice
they could never
carries
explain.
a different weight.
Whispered accounts
And
of
without
spiritual
realizing
signs
it,
on
the soldier
battlefield,
began
of
questioning
voices
things once
visions,
too solid to touch,
premonitions that
fate,
saved lives,
purpose,
chance.
Until that moment,
There's something
he'd
rarely
always
discussed
listened
about
with
conflict
skepticism.
zones.
To
They
him,
create
war
a
was
unique
concrete,
kind of sensitivity.
brutal,
No
not
room for
weakness,
the inexplicable.
adaptation.
But there,
Senses
facing
sharpened,
that child,
intuition
every certainty
seems
began
louder.
to crumble.
Many
The
veterans
silence
report
was
this
so
feeling,
deep he
though
could
few
hear
can
his
explain
own breath
clearly.
inside his helmet.
It's as if the line
One
between
wrong
rational
step,
and
it would
inexplicable
all be
grows
over.
thinner.
And yet,
And when that
something
happens,
within him shouted
events
louder than
dismissed
fear,
elsewhere
an
gain
almost
entirely
instinctive
different
human
impact.
impulse he
That
couldn't contain.
minefield wasn't
He
just
didn't
physical,
see an
it
enemy.
was a convergence
He saw
point.
a life in
Everything
danger.
the soldier had
And
lived
perhaps
until then,
that's precisely
losses,
what war tries
fear,
hardest to
resilience,
destroy.
hard choices,
The capacity for
seemed
compassion.
concentrated in that
Yet
space.
there it was,
Every
pulsing
war
strongly,
memory pulsed
forcing him
silently
to make a
as he
decision
advanced.
no manual
The
had
mission
ever taught.
continued. As
Protocols
seconds
were
ticked
followed,
by,
but
the child
something was
didn't
already
move,
moving within
didn't
him.
cry,
A subtle,
didn't
almost
call for
imperceptible
help.
shift
She
that would
just
only
looked.
become clear
A
later.
gaze the soldier
The surrounding
would never forget.
conflict marched
Calm
on
yet
him personally,
urgent, as
compelling him
always.
to take his
Orders
first step
were orders,
beyond the safe line.
maps were maps.
Every movement
but the
was
human
calculated.
experience
Every
unfolding
breath
there
held.
didn't fit into official
Adrenaline
reports.
surged.
There was no
He knew
space
this
to
act
record
might be the
sensations,
last of his
premonitions,
life,
or
but he
deep
also
doubts.
knew he couldn't
These
live with himself
elements stayed
if he
hidden,
simply turned
waiting
away.
for the right moment
What happens
to surface.
next changes
And
everything.
sometimes,
Not just
that
in
moment
that minefield,
arrives abruptly,
but in the soldier's
through
entire
something that
life
shatters
after the
the
war
logic
ended.
of that controlled
Soldiers who
environment.
return from war
It's at
often
this
carry
point that the
invisible
journey
scars,
shifts from external
memories
to
that
internal.
surface in the
The
stillness
soldier
of night.
was still there,
Some
mid-mission,
call it trauma,
but part of him
others
had already
call it
moved
destiny.
elsewhere. And
A
there are
space
those who
where
believe
questions
that in
arise
certain extreme
unannounced
moments,
and answers
the spiritual
feel
manifests
insufficient.
in ways
The
that
impact
defy
of that
all
scene
human
wouldn't
logic.
end when
Take
he
a
left
deep
the
breath
minefield.
and stay with me.
It would
because
keep
this vision that
reverberating,
paralyzed the
shaping
soldier
future
is only the
decisions,
beginning of a story that
influencing
weaves
how
through
he saw
war,
the world
faith,
long after the
and
war.
what many still
And as
fear
this
to name.
atmosphere of
What
tension,
comes next
risk,
reveals
and
the exact
absolute
moment
silence
when
set the
everything
stage.
stopped making
Something
sense,
was about to happen,
and nothing was
something
ever the
that
same
would
again.
challenge everything he
moved
thought
forward,
he knew about
body
reality,
tense,
perception,
feeling
and
the weight
control.
of his rifle.
Before
and the
moving
memories he'd
forward,
carried
comment
even
below,
before that day.
this makes sense
Every
to me.
step echoed inside
Before
his
any
own
of
mind,
this,
as if
before
the
the
minefield
minefield,
existed
the heavy
within him
silence,
too.
the
And as this
impossible
story
vision,
begins to
there was an
unfold,
ordinary man
perhaps
beneath
something
the
inside
uniform,
you is
a
awakening
soldier
as well.
like countless
Because,
others,
in
who
some
one day
way,
left
we've
home
all
believing he
faced
could separate
situations
who
that
he
challenged
was from
our
what
logic,
he'd have to
our
do.
faith,
He
or
had a
what we
name,
believed
a
possible.
simple routine.
If this
Small
resonates with you,
habits that
leave a
now
comment
felt
below
impossibly
about what
distant.
touched you most
He
so
liked
far.
waking early,
Sometimes,
even outside the
writing
barracks,
is the
because
first way
morning
to
silence
understand
always
what
gave
we
him a
feel.
sense of control.
Stories
A
like
control
this
he'd
aren't
slowly
meant just
lose
to
in
be
war.
heard in silence.
He hadn't joined
They
the army
create
seeking
invisible
heroism
bridges
between people
He'd
who've
done
never
it
met
out of
but share
necessity,
the same
opportunity,
doubts, fears,
a mix of
and
factors
unanswered
rarely
questions.
explained in one
Maybe
sentence.
you've never set foot
There
on
were
a battlefield,
bills,
family
but you felt that
expectations,
spine-chilling
and a quiet
moment when
belief he'd
something
be strong enough to
inexplicable
handle
happened.
anything.
Or maybe
At
you know
first,
someone who
his
came back
mindset
from
was
war
clear.
changed,
Complete
carrying
missions,
signs that
follow
don't show
orders,
up in
return
photographs.
home whole.
Sharing
That
your
promise
experience
was never
or thoughts
spoken
in the
aloud,
comments
but
might
he
help
repeated
someone
it to
else feel
himself
less
countless
alone.
times.
Your voice
Coming
matters
back alive
more than
became
you
an
imagine.
intimate,
And
almost
if, at any
sacred
point
pact.
in this account,
Over
your
time,
heart raced,
war began
your mind
claiming its
painted
price,
vivid images,
not abruptly,
or you felt
but
that
slowly,
silent tension
steadily.
alongside the soldier.
Each loss
Liking
left
this video
an
is a simple
invisible
but powerful way to
Comrades
show that these
present
kinds of
one
stories
day,
need to keep
gone
being
the
told.
next. Every like helps
Interrupted
this
content
conversation
reach more people
laughs
seeking to
never
understand
repeated.
war's invisible
He learned
side,
not to get
spiritual
attached,
marks,
or at
deep
least
transformations
tried.
unseen
But the hidden
in news
truth
reports.
is,
No
this
one
channel
crosses
exists
this journey
precisely for this.
unburdened.
To make
the
space
impact
for moving
isn't just
stories,
from what you see,
transformed lives,
but from what you
and accounts
feel
that
and
touch
can't
places
express.
ordinary words
There were
can't
nights
reach.
when sleep
When you
wouldn't come.
subscribe, you're
When
not
it
just
did,
following
it
a
was fragmented. You're saying you want to keep walking through these images. To be part of a community that think of the life left behind and reflects. Familiar faces, your participation is what allows this channel to grow and reach more people if with this kind of content. Still exist, keeping alive a message that goes beyond entertainment. Would still exist. So, as the soldier takes another step across that silent terrain, shaped future while the image of the child even if he didn't realize memory, and he also carried fear. Though he rarely admitted because what comes next of failing, this moment, of making mistakes, revealing not protecting those beside him. And changes everything how to handle external threats. The setting where it all happened wasn't just hostile. That battle was designed to destroy in every remnant where there are no clear commands, a dry, scarred land marked by old craters, everyone charred vehicle their own way and rusted warning signs that no longer frightened anyone. Because
There,
stopping
the
wasn't
conflict
an
had
option.
no clear face.
Because others
No
depended
defined
on
front
him.
lines or
Because
rear guard.
deep down,
Every
he
mission
believed
was a
each
leap
step
into the
brought
dark.
him closer to
Every
home.
step a decision
That
that
hope,
could cost
fragile
everything.
as it was,
Soldiers
sustained
operating
his
in such
journey.
environments
And it's
quickly
curious
learn that
how,
the real
in
enemy
extreme
isn't
environments,
always armed.
small beliefs gain
Sometimes
enormous
it
weight.
lies buried
A
beneath
repeated
the earth,
thought,
an
silent,
automatic gesture,
waiting for
a
the
mental
perfect
phrase
moment.
that becomes an
That
anchor
day's
when
mission was
everything
simple on
feels
paper
unstable.
but brutal in execution.
Before the life-changing
area
event,
reconnaissance,
he'd already
checking
made
for
hard
possible
choices.
enemy routes,
Some
slow
right,
and steady
others
advancement.
questionable.
The kind
He
of
crossed
operation
limits
demanding
he never
absolute
imagined
focus
crossing.
and near
These
superhuman
experiences
emotional
didn't
control.
make him cold.
Constant
As many
risks
assume.
came not just
They
from
made him
explosions,
attentive,
but
more
from
psychological
more
erosion.
silent.
Hours
The
of transformation
silent
wasn't
marching
visible,
under a
but it was
merciless sun,
there, forming
exhausted
layer by
body,
layer,
mind on high
preparing him,
alert,
though he didn't
at
know
any
it,
second,
for something
it
that would
could all
completely
end.
challenge his
And when you
perception
live
of
like
reality.
that for days,
Now I want to
weeks,
go even
months,
deeper.
something
Because
inside you
understanding
begins to
who
change.
he was before
In
is
that
essential
environment,
to grasping
the soldier's
the impact of what
mindset
followed.
transformed.
This isn't
Emotions
just a soldier
were
on a
suppressed.
mission.
Decisions had to be
carrying
fast.
expectations,
Survival instinct
guilt,
overrode
promises,
deeper
and
reflection.
doubts. There was
All
no
of it
room
was
for
present that
distraction
day,
or lingering
hidden beneath
thoughts.
heavy gear
And yet,
firm
no
posture.
matter how hard
The
they
truth
tried to
is,
shield themselves,
no one reaches
no
an
one
extraordinary
emerged
moment
unscathed.
without a
Every
story
face
built
seen,
beforehand.
every village
He
crossed,
remembered
every
clearly
unexpected
the day he
sound
left,
accumulated
the restrained
like
hug,
invisible layers
measured
in the
words,
mind. The look
it's
that
in
said
wars
more than
backstage
any
that
sentence.
these marks begin
There,
forming.
unknowingly,
Long before
he left
any
part of himself
extraordinary
behind
event occurs,
and silently promised to return for it. That promise accompanied every decision, every calculated risk, every cautious advance. It was an invisible thread linking the start to the end of his journey. But war has its own logic. It tests limits, distorts certainties, and exposes truths that lay dormant. Over time, he began noticing small changes in his own mindset, a sharper awareness, closer attention to details, a strange sense that not everything could be explained by strategy or chance. He didn't speak of it. He kept it inside, like so many others do. That inner silence, that accumulation of experiences, created perfect ground for the unexpected, not as punishment, but as revelation. Because sometimes, you must be broken in certain places to see beyond the obvious. And at that precise moment in his life, everything he'd lived seemed to converge into a single instant. An instant that wouldn't appear out of nowhere, but from the buildup of everything he'd been until then. As he continued his duties, unaware of what was coming, the transformation was already underway. Not visible, not announced, but real. And that's where the story gains new meaning, connecting past and present in ways few can anticipate. Before we go further on this journey, comment, "I'm on this journey too." Then, suddenly, everything around seemed to reorganize around a single point. There was no warning, no sound, no prior sign. Just presence. In the middle of that risk-laced terrain, the child was there. Too small to understand danger, too still to be real, too silent to make sense. She didn't run, didn't cry, didn't call for anyone. She just stood, like the minefield didn't exist, like the rules of that place didn't apply to her. The soldier's eyes were immediately drawn to that figure, not by conscious choice, but reflex. Something inside him recognized her as absolute priority. His heart raced, his breath shortened, his mind shifted into a different, almost desperate rhythm. Children weren't on the map. They weren't in the briefings. They weren't part of the mission. Yet there she was, dead center of a territory where one wrong move could mean irreversible explosion. He tried to rationalize. Thought it might be a mirage, extreme exhaustion, stress-induced distortion. But the more he blinked, the clearer the image became. The child had defined contours, simple clothes covered in dust, feet firmly on the ground. And then there was that look, a fixed direct gaze showing no fear, yet not comfort either. It was a look that seemed to pierce through, past the uniform, past the weapon, past the trained posture. The immediate feeling was urgency, an urgency born not of logic, but of deep humanity. It wasn't an order over the radio or a command instruction. It came from within, bulldozing protocols, breaking mental barriers built over years. His survival-trained mindset began battling a visceral, almost primal need to act. And that internal conflict happened in seconds, though it felt like eternity. The moral dilemma struck brutally. Moving forward meant risking his life, and possibly others.
Not moving meant abandoning someone who, in his eyes, needed immediate help. War usually reduces decisions to numbers, strategies, objectives. But there, facing that child, all that lost its power. What remained was the silent question echoing inside. What kind of person would he be if he simply turned his back? The environment's silence amplified everything. Each thought grew louder, each heartbeat sounded like a warning. He felt sweat trickle down his neck, despite the dry climate. His hands gripped his gear almost automatically, seeking support that wasn't there. The minefield remained the same, relentless and invisible, but now something more powerful was present, a choice carrying immeasurable impact. The child didn't move, showed no impatience, no surprise, just watched. And that made everything even more disturbing. There was no desperation on her face, only a kind of silent expectation, as if knowing this meeting had to happen. This perception, though hard to explain, struck the soldier with force. A strange, almost uncomfortable feeling that this moment was part of something greater, something he couldn't yet understand. Now I want to go even deeper, because this instant can't be seen just as an impulsive reaction. It reveals much about transformation, about decisions made under extreme pressure, about hidden truths emerging when we face life or death situations. The soldier wasn't just facing a child, he was facing everything he'd tried to silence within himself since the war began. Empathy, guilt, hope, fear. All of it surfaced at once, demanding an immediate answer. Time seemed distorted. The world lost sharpness, as if that scene were isolated from the broader conflict. There was no past or future, only now. And in that now, the child's presence completely redefined the mission. Not because it was written anywhere, but because his conscience had already made a choice before he even realized it. A choice not of pure reason, but of who he truly was. This is the part of the journey few can explain afterward, the exact moment something external touches something internal, triggering irreversible change. It's not about courage or recklessness, but a breaking point. One of those rare instances when life tests not just your skills, but your values. And in that minefield, the soldier was being confronted with his own limits, with what still kept him human amid destruction. As he assessed every inch of terrain, with tension reaching unbearable levels, something began unfolding beyond what eyes could see. A silent revelation, still incomplete, yet already present. The impact of this encounter wouldn't be limited to that day. It would extend, influencing future decisions, reshaping perceptions, opening space for questions without simple answers. And right here, with the soldier suspended between advance and hesitation, with the child still motionless, the story gains even greater depth, setting the stage for a development that defies any immediate explanation. Comment below. This makes sense to me. Military training is clear, direct, almost ruthless. It exists to eliminate doubt in extreme situations, to turn reactions into reflexes, decisions into automatic procedures. In a minefield, the rule is simple: do not advance. Mark it, retreat, wait. No exceptions. No room for impulse. Protocols exist because they save lives. And the soldier knew that better than anyone. Every class, every simulation, every fatal mistake story echoed in his mind at that moment. Yet something didn't fit. His heart beat out of sync with training. His breath didn't follow learned patterns. His mind, accustomed to analyzing risks with cold clarity, was now invaded by an urgency that asked no permission. It was as if two opposing forces fought for control. On one side, logic built over years; on the other, a silent call ignoring all rules. This internal conflict didn't last long in real time, but it was deep enough to mark irreversible transformation. He looked around, seeking something concrete. The terrain remained the same, ruthless and treacherous. No movement, no signs of life beyond the child. The radio stayed silent. And in that void, the decision began forming, not as a clear thought, but as an uncomfortable certainty. There were moments when following protocol meant surviving physically but dying inside. And there were moments when following your heart meant facing unpredictable consequences. Now I want to go even deeper, because this choice didn't come from recklessness. It came from everything the soldier had lived until then. Every loss, every suppressed fear, every silent promise condensed into that second. His war-trained mindset began giving way to something older, more essential, a sense of responsibility not from hierarchy, but from conscience. The hidden truth is, in certain situations, the greatest battlefield isn't on the ground, but within yourself. The first step was taken almost unconsciously, a calculated, slow movement, as if his body knew what to do before his mind could authorize it. The gear felt heavier, the ground more unstable. Every centimeter forward was a negotiation with fate. He knew, with absolute clarity, that this step might be his last. That awareness didn't paralyze him. On the contrary, it brought a strange, almost painful lucidity. Everything grew sharper, more intense, as if the world had turned up its volume. Training screamed to stop. Reason listed every disaster possibility. But his heart pulled in another direction. Insistent, firm. There was no heroism here, just necessity. The decision had already been made, even if he hadn't verbalized it to himself. Running wasn't part of the protocol, but slow, careful advancement was. Yet when he realized it, his pace had changed. Not a reckless sprint, but not the extreme caution he'd been taught either. It was movement guided by something hard to name. Each step carried enormous weight. The sound of his boot on the soil seemed too loud. Time distorted again. The soldier felt his heart pounding, but kept his eyes locked on the child. There was no room for hesitation now. Hesitation would be more dangerous than moving forward. That realization hit him hard. Sometimes, the riskiest choice is stopping halfway. As he advanced, fragmented thoughts flashed in and out, faces from the past, unspoken words, pre-war life images. Everything passed quickly, like mental snapshots. It was as if his brain were reviewing his whole journey in seconds, preparing for any outcome. This sensation is common in extreme moments, but rarely discussed. Behind the mind's scenes, much happens when life hangs by a thread. The soldier's heart wasn't just reacting to physical danger. It responded to the symbolic weight of this act. Moving forward meant breaking rules, defying unspoken orders, taking full responsibility for consequences. There was no blaming training, command, or the mission. This decision was entirely his. And that made everything more intense. The freedom to choose, in an environment where nearly everything is controlled, comes at a high cost. The child remained still. Her gaze unchanged, fixed, attentive. No panic, no surprise. This only deepened the strangeness. Instead of relieving tension, it intensified it. Something about this encounter felt loaded with meaning, as if this movement wasn't just physical, but part of a larger journey. One of those revelations that don't announce themselves, they just happen. The soldier felt a tightness in his chest, not from physical strain, but from the weight of consciousness, choice, and the possibility of no return. Yet he kept going. Not because he believed in a specific ending, but because, in that moment, moving forward seemed the only option consistent with who he still was inside. War can shape behavior, but it doesn't always erase essence completely. This decision, made in seconds, carried impact far beyond the minefield. It touched something deeper, something that would echo long after that day. A choice not easily forgotten or explained. And as the soldier advanced, every muscle tense, every thought racing, something began aligning silently, preparing the ground for an event that would reshape his understanding of reality, control, and purpose. At this point in the journey, nothing could be undone. The movement had begun, and whatever consequences came, they'd have to be faced. It's on this edge, between the known and the inexplicable, that the story gains new weight, opening space for something entirely unexpected. Comment below. This makes sense to me. It was during this tense advance that something happened without warning. No explosion, no sudden movement, no sound signaling change. A blink. The slightest pause between breaths. And the child was simply gone. Where there had been a clear, defined presence, only the empty, marked terrain remained. The space was untouched, no footprints, no signs of escape. It was as if that image had been erased from reality. The soldier froze instantly. His body locked before his mind could process what he was seeing. His eyes scanned the area rapidly, searching for any logical explanation. Maybe she'd moved too fast to notice. Maybe she was crouched behind something invisible. But there was nothing, no different shadow, no noise, no sign of life. Just the same silent, indifferent minefield, as if nothing had happened. The silence, already heavy, became suffocating. Not the usual wartime quiet he'd grown used to, but another kind of soundless void, almost artificial. An absence that seemed to press on both ears and mind simultaneously. His heart raced differently now, not from immediate physical danger, but from utter confusion. Fear and disbelief mixed into a hard-to-describe sensation. He blinked repeatedly, rubbed his eyes carefully, trying not to move unnecessarily. Training said to retreat, mark the area, report any anomaly. But how do you report something that leaves no trace? How do you explain a disappearance that defied time and space? His rational mind desperately sought any plausible answer, anything to restore some sense of control. None came. His breathing grew irregular. His whole body stood on high alert, as if awaiting something even worse. His mind replayed the last seconds again and again, searching for a flaw in his own perception. But the child's image was too vivid to dismiss as imagination. The look, the posture, the urgency he'd felt, everything had been real. And now, all of it had been replaced by a disturbing emptiness. The fear that arose then wasn't ordinary wartime fear, not fear of dying or making a tactical error. It was a deeper, more primal fear. The fear of not understanding. The fear of facing something that completely escaped known rules. In the backstage of his mind, a persistent question formed: if it wasn't real, why did it feel so true? Now I want to go even deeper, because this moment marks a clear rupture in the soldier's journey. This isn't just a scare or strange event, it's a point where reality itself begins to unravel. The hidden truth of such experiences isn't what disappeared, but the impact it leaves on the witness. From then on, nothing could be viewed through visible logic alone. He stood motionless for seconds, or maybe minutes. Time again lost its usual shape. Every detail around seemed exaggeratedly clear: soil texture, air heat, gear weight. Everything was there, concrete, tangible. Except the child. That contradiction created growing discomfort. The feeling that something important had happened, even without proof, began settling in permanently. Confusion gave way to silent questioning. Was it a warning? Extreme exhaustion? A projection of his mind coping with hostile surroundings? Or something more, something beyond common explanation? These questions didn't demand immediate answers. They simply accumulated, preparing the ground for an inner transformation he hadn't yet recognized. Fear now came paired with a strange sense of respect, as if that disappearance carried meaning not to be ignored. There was no direct threat, but an implicit message, hard to decipher. His journey, until then defined by protocols and objective decisions, was now entering unfamiliar territory, a space where logic and intuition uncomfortably met. He felt a shiver run through his body despite the intense heat. Not physical cold, but an internal alert. Something had changed. Not in the environment, but within him. Absolute trust in what he could see and measure had been shaken. That crack in his rigid soldier's mindset opened space for doubts he'd never allowed before. And those doubts carried weight. Impact. War continued around him, indifferent to this isolated experience. But for him, that instant stood out as a landmark, one of those rare moments when reality seems to slip through your fingers, leaving only questions. The revelation wasn't complete, but the path toward it had begun. And once started, there was no easy return. As he remained there, trying to reorganize thoughts and sensations, something quietly adjusted within his consciousness. The child's disappearance didn't end anything. On the contrary, it opened a door. A door to interpretations, inner conflicts, future decisions influenced by that inexplicable moment. And that door, now open, couldn't simply be closed again. Before we continue this journey, write in the comments, "This makes sense to me." The impact came immediately, no time to adjust. The soldier's body reacted before he understood what he was feeling. His hands trembled involuntarily, a fine persistent shake he tried controlling by gripping his gear tighter. His breathing stayed shallow, irregular, as if the surrounding air had grown heavier. It wasn't physical exhaustion, he knew that limit well. This was different, an internal shock caused by the abrupt collapse of everything that had made sense just seconds earlier. His eyes stung, not from dust or wind, but from silent pressure, a suppressed urge to cry. The tears stayed trapped in his throat, held back by years of discipline and self-control. In war, showing fragility is rarely simple. Yet in that moment, holding back emotion took more effort than facing any enemy advance. His heart pounded, but now to a rhythm disconnected from action, as if trying to keep up with something his mind hadn't yet grasped. His comrades noticed almost immediately that something was wrong. The soldier wasn't advancing, retreating, or signaling. He stood too still for that context. Some approached cautiously, following protocol, asking over the radio what had happened. He tried to respond, but words wouldn't form. How do you explain a disappearance leaving no trace? How do you phrase something even you can't fully comprehend? When he finally spoke, reactions were predictable. Suspicious glances, awkward silence, quick attempts to rationalize. Someone suggested extreme stress. Another mentioned accumulated fatigue. A few called it a momentary illusion. None of these sounded offensive, but none fit. Deep down, he knew. He knew with uncomfortable certainty that this wasn't just in his mind. The feeling was too clear, the emotional impact too profound to be easily dismissed. Now I want to go even deeper, because it's right here that the experience stops being an isolated event and starts shaping the soldier's journey. Others' disbelief didn't erase what he felt. On the contrary, it deepened his internal isolation. When something extraordinary happens without external validation, it takes root more intensely within. It begins working backstage in consciousness, influencing future thoughts, decisions, and perceptions. The trembling didn't stop immediately. Even after leaving the area, even after following procedures, his body kept reacting as if danger remained. It was a constant alert, a physical memory of what happened. His mind tried regaining control, but something had shifted. His rigid certainty-based mindset now had to coexist with an impossible-to-ignore doubt. He revisited the moment repeatedly. Every detail analyzed, every second reconstructed. The child's look, the absence of sound, the abrupt disappearance. No clear flaws. No obvious lapses. The more he thought, the more the conclusion imposed itself. Something beyond normal had occurred. And accepting that required a profound shift in how he understood reality itself. This psychological impact wasn't just immediate in the body. It began spreading slowly, like a wave. It affected sleep, concentration, how he related to others. The soldier grew quieter than before, less inclined toward superficial talk. A new layer of reflection entered everything he did. War, once just a hostile environment, now blended with larger, harder-to-name questions. The certainty that something extraordinary had happened wasn't paired with constant fear, but with persistent restlessness. Not panic, but curiosity mixed with caution. A sense that this episode was part of something greater, not yet revealed. That perception brought no answers, only more questions. And those questions carried weight, a burden he'd carry from then on. In quiet moments, when external noise faded, his mind automatically returned to that minefield. Not as explosive trauma, but as a fixed point, a silent landmark. The experience began redefining priorities, influencing future decisions, even without his immediate awareness. This is how certain transformations happen. Quietly, almost invisibly, yet deeply effective. His comrades resumed routines, missions continued, conflict didn't pause. But internally, something had changed irreversibly. The soldier could no longer ignore the possibility that not everything is visible or measurable. That opening, still timid, created space for new interpretations, new ways of reading his own journey. The experience wasn't shared again. There were no right words, no safe space for it. It stayed hidden, maturing in silence. And the more time passed, the clearer it became that this moment hadn't been psychological accident, but an inflection point. One of those revelations that don't announce themselves as such, yet change everything gradually. As he tried regaining balance and moving forward, the feeling persisted. Something important had begun in that minefield. Not concluded, not explained, just begun. And that beginning, filled with impact and mystery, would keep reverberating, guiding him through internal paths not yet explored. Before continuing this journey, comment, "This makes sense to me." The return happened without fanfare, without ceremony, like so many mission endings. The soldier was now home, far from gunpowder smells, constant alerts, and ever-present tension. Walls were solid, the floor firm, the silence different. Yet nothing felt truly safe. The war was behind him on the map, but not within. The image of that minefield remained intact, surfacing in ordinary moments, in daily pauses, as if etched into deep memory. He tried resuming routine. Walking familiar streets, sitting at the table, hearing casual conversations. Everything followed its normal course, but an invisible distance had emerged between him and the world. People saw a man who returned, someone who survived. What they didn't see was the silent weight he carried. That scene didn't fade with time or lose sharpness. On the contrary, it seemed to gain new contours as days passed, as if demanding to be understood. At night, when his body finally relaxed, his mind stayed alert. No explosions, no screams, just absence. The inexplicable disappearance appeared as a fixed point in the dark. He didn't wake up sweating or crying, didn't relive the moment explicitly. It was subtler than that, an ever-present feeling that something important had been left unanswered. And that feeling began quietly shaping his mindset. Simple decisions now carried different weight. Small choices gained an extra moment of reflection, not from fear, but awareness. Something inside him had shifted, forcing an involuntary reassessment of his own logic. Reality no longer seemed so closed, so predictable. There was a hidden truth in that episode, and ignoring it felt impossible. The transformation wasn't sudden or visible to others. It happened backstage, beyond watchful eyes, but with real impact. He realized he could no longer accept superficial explanations easily. A new restlessness emerged, a curiosity not seeking ready answers. It was an inner journey made of silent observations and provisional conclusions. The world remained the same, but how he saw it had changed. The war experience had moved beyond the physical and settled into the delicate territory of perception. Now I want to go even deeper, because it's here that transformation reveals itself more clearly. Being home didn't mean being at peace. External comfort contrasted with internal unease. He realized he'd crossed an invisible threshold, one that didn't allow full return to his former self. War, once just an event, had become a filter through which everything passed. The soldier began noticing subtle changes in his own behavior, prolonged silences, more attentive gazes, different listening. Not isolation from rejection, but from need to process. Revelations were unfolding in layers, each needing time to absorb. He didn't speak of the event, but thought of it often. And the more he reflected, the more he understood that image represented something bigger than an unsolved mystery. The vanished child became a symbol of rupture, a break in the illusion of absolute control, in the belief that everything can be explained or predicted. This realization didn't bring despair, but humility, an uncomfortable acceptance that reality is broader than manuals, more complex than training. This mindset shift didn't weaken him. On the contrary, it brought different strength, less rigid, more conscious. He started questioning the real impact of extreme experiences on who we become. He saw that some encounters don't just prepare us to survive, but to see. And seeing is often a silent burden. The journey that began in that minefield now extended into his own life, influencing relationships, choices, expectations. None of this was visible to outside observers. To others, he was just someone trying to readjust. But within, a process was underway, a slow, deep reorganization. The image persisted not as classic trauma, but as a constant invitation to reflect, a reminder that some events don't demand immediate reaction, only presence and listening. Over time, he understood that experience wasn't meant to frighten, but to reveal. To reveal limits, open questions, provoke transformation that can't be measured in words. The war had officially ended, but his inner journey had just begun. And as he tried understanding the true impact of it all, the feeling remained clear. That story still held layers waiting to be accessed, understood, and integrated. Comment below, I'm on this journey too. From that point on, something began reorganizing within him, a change he himself took time to notice. It wasn't an announced shift or conscious decision. It was as if the experience had opened a silent crack through which new perceptions slowly entered. Small signs began catching his attention. Coincidences once dismissed were now observed carefully. Subtle sensations arose unexpectedly, bringing a strange, almost inexplicable calm, as if something were trying to communicate beyond ordinary logic. He'd never been someone comfortable talking about faith. Military training teaches trust in procedures, strategy, calculation. But after that episode, his rigid mindset started making room for another way of understanding. It wasn't about abandoning what he knew, but accepting that perhaps there was more. The hidden truth behind that experience seemed less about what happened, and more about what it awakened within him. In moments of silence, he felt a difficult-to-name presence. Not fear, not anxiety, but a sense of guidance, as if something were quietly aligning his thoughts and emotions. He began reflecting on purpose, impact, decisions made and yet to come. War had shown him humanity's worst, but that specific instant had revealed something entirely different, something pointing to meaning amid chaos. Other accounts began surfacing in his life almost by chance. Brief conversations, distant stories, testimonials from soldiers who'd also returned changed. Men and women carrying hard-to-explain experiences, unlikely encounters, inexplicable protection. Stories never in official reports, but circulating backstage, passed quietly, with respect and care. He realized he wasn't alone on this inner journey. These narratives shared something in common. None tried to prove anything. No spectacle, no need to convince. They were simple accounts, charged with transformation. People who returned from war with visible and invisible scars, but also with heightened sensitivity, different perception of life. For many, faith didn't emerge as immediate answer, but as process, a slow reconstruction of identity. Now I want to go even deeper, because here, the shift in purpose begins taking shape. He understood that experience wasn't an endpoint, but a milestone. Something that reorganized priorities and brought clarity about what truly matters. The search for meaning stopped being abstract and began showing up in small choices, in how he treated people, in how he handled time and silence. The spirituality that awakened carried no labels. It was more an inner listening, an increased attention to signs, a willingness to recognize that not everything needs controlling. This openness brought responsibility. He felt he needed to honor what he'd lived, not turning it into fear, but into learning. His personal journey now included deep reflection, reading, conversation, and sincere desire to understand his role in the world after all that had happened. The child's image, once tied only to mystery and confusion, began gaining new meaning. Not as answer, but as symbol. A constant reminder that life is fragile, unpredictable, yet full of invisible layers. This understanding changed his relationship with past and future. He stopped seeking closed explanations and began accepting gradual revelations, those that emerge when you're willing to look beyond the obvious. The inner transformation didn't distance him from reality. On the contrary, it made him more present, more attentive to others' pain, more careful with words and decisions. He realized extreme experiences can destroy or rebuild, and the difference lies in how you choose to carry what you've lived. The minefield episode left marks, but also opened unexpected paths, pointing toward a purpose still unfolding. This change didn't resolve inner conflicts or eliminate doubts. It simply offered a new axis, a balance point between what was and what could still be. The faith-born there promised no quick answers, but provided support to keep walking. And as he continued integrating all this into his story, it grew clearer that the event hadn't ended with the disappearance. It kept reverberating, quietly guiding the next steps of a journey still holding much to reveal. Comment below. This makes sense to me. The question kept echoing within him, quietly insistent, almost respectful, as if not demanding immediate answer. What really happened that day? Divine protection, or something beyond human understanding? He realized that the more he tried pinning this down to a single definition, the more it slipped away. Perhaps because some experiences aren't meant to be explained, but to transform how we live afterward. That doubt didn't paralyze him. On the contrary, it pushed his consciousness toward greater attentiveness, openness, and honesty with himself. Over time, he understood that real change wasn't in the event itself, but in its silent impact on his mindset. Decisions now carried more weight, more intention. Things once urgent lost space, while simple gestures gained unexpected value. A hidden truth slowly revealed itself. Surviving isn't just about keeping breath. It's about learning to live differently after certain encounters with the inexplicable. He began observing how other veterans handled similar stories. Some avoided talking, others clung to technical explanations, others embraced faith intensely. No path was identical, but all seemed crossed by the same invisible line, the feeling of having been protected when logic said otherwise. In backstage conversations, far from rehearsed speeches, deep confessions emerged, filled with emotion, fear, and gratitude. That's where the deepest revelations happened. Now I want to go even deeper, because here, reflection shifts from personal to collective. How many stories like this have never been told? How many soldiers carry similar questions, hidden for years, out of fear of seeming weak or fanciful? War, beyond destroying cities and bodies, also pushes people to internal frontiers where reason alone isn't enough. And perhaps it's exactly at that boundary that something greater manifests. He came to accept he didn't need to choose between belief and disbelief. His journey didn't require labels. What mattered was recognizing the real impact of that experience on daily life. It made him more human, more aware of others' fragility, more careful with quick judgments. This transformation didn't come with absolute certainties, but with a sensitivity that hadn't existed before. A willingness to listen, observe signs, respect mystery. The question about divine protection or something beyond human understanding remained open, but no longer bothered him. It now served as a constant reminder that not everything needs controlling or understanding to hold meaning. Some experiences exist only to reposition the soul, adjust perspective, and redefine priorities. And in doing so, they change destinies in ways only clear much later. Curiously, the more he reflected, the more he saw this doubt also connected people. Different stories, distinct settings, but the same feeling of having been spared by something absent from manuals and official reports. That invisible connection created a kind of silent community, formed by those who know they returned, but didn't return the same. Who went through something that left marks, but also opened previously inaccessible inner doors. This reflection doesn't conclude anything. It only deepens the question and prepares ground to understand that some answers don't come as words, but as changed paths, more conscious choices, and a more attentive gaze toward what can't be seen. And as this story continues unfolding, new layers emerge, bringing fresh perspectives, meanings, and details still waiting to be revealed. Comment below. I believe in signs. If you've made it this far, it's because this story touched you in some way. Maybe not through the same paths or images, but through that same silent question that lingers afterward. If this resonated with you, consider subscribing to the channel. That's how this space keeps existing, gathering real, deep stories that aren't told by chance and always leave a mark on those who listen. If you feel moved, leave a comment saying, "This message was for me," or "I'm with you till the end." That builds a bridge between storyteller and listener, and shows this journey isn't solitary. And if you felt that connection at any point in this video, a like is a simple way to acknowledge it. There's a video right here beside this one that complements this topic perfectly, with another story following the same thread of transformation and mystery. Click it and continue with me there.